Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is the Aspen City Council work session for June 5th, 2023. On our agenda this evening, we have three items: allocation of short-term tax revenue, asset management plan review, revenue assumptions, and then the ACRA use of city assets and refresh and updates of the Armory, Old Powerhouse, and Main Street cabin renovations. And with that, we'll get right into item one, which is our allocation of short-term rental tax revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pete Stricker, Finance Director. Okay, if I share my screen.
Please do.
There we go. Thank you. So tonight I'm here to provide you with kind of a high-level summary of some revenue streams coming into the city and kind of how that plays into your second part of your discussion tonight about the Armory. As you all know, we had a new tax question to the voters back in November. That tax was adopted and had a delayed start date until May 1st. So basically any stays in short-term rental permitted properties after May 1st started to collect this tax. We are actually just now starting to receive the tax because of the end of May. We had to wait for the month to close. And we have our tax forms up and running. Our bulk filing process is actually a little behind yet, so we hope to have that out in the next 2 weeks. So we'll have everybody filing by the end of the month still. So we'll get our first glimpse of kind of how revenues are coming in. That said, May is a really light month for stays, so it won't really be very telling as to like the total revenue for the year. But with that tax, basically there were a couple of notes in the ballot question, mandates if you will, on how those revenues were to be used. The first is that a minimum of 70% had to go to affordable housing. That is really not the question I was bringing to you tonight, but it's more about the remainder, which had a caveat or a wider scope for environmental initiatives and for infrastructure maintenance and repair. And so basically staff is looking for some direction on how to allocate that remaining 30%. The tax question, we had to put in an estimate for the Blue Book for its first full year of collections. And so that is pegged right now at $9.1 million. So the 30% that we're really talking about tonight comes out to about $2.7 million. As I said before, we have these two different buckets of capital and environmental needs. The council's been having a lot of discussions with folks from the Environmental Health Office as well as at its own table in terms of things like the Armory. And so you can see that there's these competing priorities for things that these dollars could be used for. So we're really just trying to weigh that with your direction and figure out how to best collect these funds and then basically deposit them for use. So at this time, I do want to caveat first thing, any decision you make tonight is not permanent. The council has discretion on how to use this 30%, and it can change over time. But staff is at this point in time going to give you a recommendation of 75% to capital, really to prioritize the Armory and its renovation, and the remaining 25% going to the environmental aspects, basically with the ASAP and other programs that we want to keep moving forward. The biggest thing here is capital construction costs continue to go up, and so in some ways being able to have this dedicated revenue stream to help pay for the Armory helps us not only keep that desire moving forward, but it also actually helps protect some of our other assets from having to get weighed against that project. So two caveats, two big items that are kind of built into the packet and into the slide deck is that we had to make an assumption about the Armory. So at this point in time, we've heard from council that they would wish to move that up a couple of years to 2026 at a minimum. So based on the placeholder number of 23 million that we've talked about with council, and you'll hear more about some figures later on from the next presentation, but assuming that $23 million and growing that at 8% a year for the next 3 years, that's really a $29 million project when we're up and running on that one. In the packet, you saw a scenario where we borrowed $20 million, basically out of the $29 million needed, and basically put in cash for the rest. That is one possible scenario. I actually have another couple of graphs here, or excuse me, tables in the next two slides that show you a slightly different example where we actually borrow for the full 30 million. And I think might be the best recommendation if you want to keep moving forward on this path. So that's one big item. The other one is the Parks and Open Space Fund supporting recreation. So this is something the council hasn't necessarily explicitly seen, but has seen over the course of time. So the Parks half-cent tax that was recently extended into perpetuity has been used on occasion to help support recreational facility needs for maintenance. And it actually was used to help build the Arc initially. So this assumption is basically to help diminish the amount of demands in the AMP and leave resources for some of the other aspects in the AMP, roads, bridges, other facilities like the old Powerhouse renovation or other projects, streets, fleet repair and replacement, things of that nature. And so basically making sure the council's on board with this. This is actually authorized in the ballot question to allow this use. And it's something we've already done, and it's already received kind of support from the Parks and Open Space Advisory Board. So I apologize that these numbers are very small. I actually already cut off about 3 or 4 years worth of extra history on here. But I did want to show you that this is an example of the long-range plan, the financial plan for the asset management plan with the $29 million renovation as well as a $29 million debt issuance. And basically what you can see on the bottom line is the ending fund balance is remaining roughly around 16 million at its low point or 15 million at its low point, and then starting to rise slowly over the remainder of the term as it goes out. Obviously, there's, like I said, a lot of capital construction escalation costs going on. That could really play into what our projections are like for some of our projects, as well as some projects that might not be on the list yet, that haven't been identified or identified as a priority. So having a cushion in a capital plan like this is important. If we borrow the $29 million, that debt service, the annual debt service to repay the loan, is not experienced in this fund. That is actually experienced in the general fund, which is this slide. So basically on a debt issuance of roughly $30 million at a 4.5% borrowing rate, we're looking at about 1.8 million on annual debt service payments for a 30-year payback. So basically what this assumes is that 1.8 million needed for the annual debt service payment could come from the short-term rental tax revenues. It also has the line right below it on this this chart, if you will, that says new environmental initiatives spend of another $740,000 and growing slightly over time. So essentially, this is what is an option for the council, and it basically demonstrates that the funds can basically support this type of planning and project load. The one thing that I would note is that you will see the targeted reserve percentage at the bottom of this going down slightly year over year over year. So it actually does say that every year we're actually consuming a little bit more than we're bringing in. And that is a little bit by design because we have an excess fund balance right now, so we would need to put the community's money to use. But also is because we have conservative revenue assumptions often in our projections, and so our expenditures may not grow as fast as our revenue assumptions here, but the opposite could be true, and our revenue assumptions are just too conservative. So with that, I guess I want to leave the council with two questions. Again, it's whether or not the council supports a 75-25 split on the environmental and capital uses of the 30% of STR tax revenue. I did give you kind of the breakdown of what that would be in that first full year, highlighted with the red box. And the debt service for this particular example I showed you, again, was about $1.8 million versus putting in about $2 million for infrastructure. It leaves a little bit of an additional cushion for other capital uses with that short-term rental tax. Obviously, you could even shift some of that money over into the environmental side if you just said, no, I just want to pay for the Armory and nothing more. You would basically put the rest of it in the environmental side. So a 70-30 split adds a little bit more to the environmental side if you needed an example of that. And then number two, I guess I would like council affirming whether or not it supports the use of the Parks and Open Space funds for the use of capital needs and recreation. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I think that walks us through those slides in the back. Turn it back over to you.
Thanks. Any questions, guys? Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Pete. I guess the first thing would be, we talked about the Armory, but what other infrastructure projects or environmental initiatives could this money be put towards that are on city's mind right now?
So the council's heard from the environmental health team and the ASAP plan, if you will. That has a whole host of items in there for environmental initiatives. I think they are slowly working through quantifying kind of dollar amounts with each subsection of that total project and vision. So that has, I couldn't even begin to quantify what the costs are for that. Obviously, you know, the city could use the short-term rental tax money for things like decaying roads and bridges. Things that are capital infrastructure and maintenance related items are fair game.
That seems obviously a fair answer, but I'm just like wondering what other decaying roads and bridges would we be neglecting if we're actually neglecting them by not using this fund for that? Or there's obviously more in the fund balance for those.
I would caution from using the word neglect.
Sorry.
In relation to infrastructure. None of our infrastructure has reached that point, just to assure the community that it's safe. There's a few things. So there's things that the council will need to decide. For example, you may say the Kids First Fund cannot fully fund the creation of a new child care center, and you use some of these funds to supplement what that restricted tax can do. So this fund, because it's in your general, the way it comes in, it can support any other funds, capital needs. Some other things that the council has discussed besides the Armory and child care would be things like the future of expansion on this campus that has come up from time to time. We are not built out on the FAR on the building next door, as an example. And so I would assure you that there is not a shortage. My first concern, quite frankly, still is roads for this community with this kind of funding, and was a big part of the discussion. The other thing that's a big part of the discussion is stormwater. The stormwater needs of this community are underfunded by several millions of dollars, and there has not been a resolution to that funding gap. This point in the 6 years I've been here. It's been one-time monies to implement some improvements, but there's many that are waiting.
Got that. I guess I'm just confused about what amount of money needs to go to the environmental side of things, just because the infrastructure seems to have these like very pressing needs. I'm not sure what the environmental side, the environment always needs to be looked after. I just don't understand.
I'll give you answers, but this is really the policy question for the council to debate rather than staff. What we've heard is that there are components of the sustainability plan that should be advancing more quickly to reduce greenhouse gas reductions, and that requires financial resources. So you have to make some choices between them. So whether that is incentivizing through building IQ, different buildings in town that have very poor efficiency to higher energy use efficiency. It can be the continued reduction of reliance on fossil fuels through natural gas expansion in the community, as some other communities in the mountains have done to begin restricting that. There's a lot of different policy questions that come with that to say it will be exactly for this or that. Once there's an approximate idea of the dollar amount known, that is a much better planning target, because right now we're just asking the staff, what do you think? If I tell them you've got $500,000 or you've got $2 million, I'll get a very different plan back and can show you what expedited timing looks like based upon the financial resources the council allots to it.
Okay. And on the environmental side, just one last question since catching up on this. Could this go towards maybe the hydro on Castle Creek, or is that something that's still like stuck in the mud? Dead? Is it dead? I don't know, I was wondering.
So there was a work session. I would encourage you to review a work session
Okay.
that happened let's see, when was that? Last June?
Last
That
June.
discussed greater energy independence for the Upper Valley and different projects that this may align with. I'll tell you, we'll probably look at utility funds first for something like that, if it's for generating power for local consumption. But it does not mean that this fund could not augment necessarily certain projects.
Okay.
And one other thing to add too is a lot of these projects actually have overlap. So if you improve the energy consumption of this building, it has an environmental impact and it has a capital component to it. So it's actually dual purpose.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
What,
I have a couple questions on the environmental. Can Building IQ and the Climate Action Plan nascent ASAP? Still cap for me. Can the Climate Action Plan and Building IQ be funded through REMP? Looking to free up more of that discretionary 30% for different uses?
There is a portion of REMP that is actually going towards the Building IQ program at this point. We contracted with CoA to help run and facilitate our Building IQ program. So I believe it was $400,000 in this year. So some of that is possible, for sure.
Yeah, because those are a couple of examples given for uses in that environmental realm. I guess my overall goal is to achieve the most funding for capital for the Armory, to put money aside for that. And like the ARC and the parks, can both of those be funded out of the revenue stream that was approved in perpetuity for the half-cent sales tax?
Yeah, so as long as the capital maintenance and infrastructure work is related kind of to the core and shell of that program, those buildings, I should say, the ARC, the Red Brick, and the Ice Garden, all three, as long as we're not doing kind of programmatic capital improvements, I think we are safe to use the Parks and Open Space Fund.
And I'm sensitive to what Sarah said about stormwater. Stormwater treatment, corrugated metal pipes in the west end are all rotting out. It's probably the least attractive use of funds that you can think of, but it's something that we need to do. So also roads aren't exactly the most attractive use, but something, again, that as a city government that we are required to do. So I would like to see as much put aside for the Armory and Kids First at Burlingame 3. Those would be my concerns and desires.
Bill?
Sure. Thanks, Pete. First, on your very first slide, you said that the tax was restricted to be used for infrastructure by the language of the vote. Does that, are we certain that that means we can use it towards capital projects on buildings, which is a lot of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'll defer to our attorney, but I believe that is a true statement. It's infrastructure, maintenance, and repair, capital.
Ballot issue said infrastructure maintenance and repair. We haven't interpreted that to, and not necessarily formally from the council's position, but we've always considered that to include not just roads and stormwater, but also buildings that we have that is infrastructure.
Why didn't we more explicitly say buildings on the ballot issue?
Kids First at
I
Burlingame 3.
don't know
The
if
language
it
of infrastructure has typically in the industry included vertical
Yeah.
construction.
Okay. Thanks. Could you pull up your first spreadsheet
Sure.
slide, please?
Spreadsheet, the one that I had on the screen?
The one that you had on the screen, yep.
Sure.
Thanks. I think that one shows your annualized projections for the total STR tax, is that correct?
1 second. Oh, there we go. You would like this screen?
Here it is too.
Yeah, I guess this shows the shares, but
This would be
does
the
any
one.
of it show your total annualized expected tax
So
revenues?
this would be in year 2024,
2024, okay, I think
2
that's
million.
fine to illustrate my point, so,
Okay.
thank you, Josh.
2.7.
I believe that the complexity and the rates at which this STR tax was implemented will cause a significant portion of our short-term rentals to shift to the gray market. So my question for you, Pete, is how have you modeled this annualized tax number, and have you factored that shift in? And when I say shift to the gray market, I believe that people who are not going to be, or who have not been able to get a license, are gonna rent anyways, and without a license, they're not gonna submit taxes, of course. And I also believe people are gonna do less than 30-day leases and just have a 30-day lease that's amended to restrict occupancy. So I believe there's going to be quite a bit of that, and there probably already is quite a bit of that happening. And so I wanna know how we're factoring that into our projections.
So the numbers that were generated were based on actual permitted properties and historical filings. So in terms of missing future renters that aren't filing, that is possible, as is possible with any of our industries that we tax for a sales tax. It's a voluntary process, just like somebody's income tax. They can cheat on it and roll the dice. But this is basically based on, for those that did file, how much business did they do at the old rates, and then basically adopted that into the new rates and tried to estimate what the tax collections would be. There's certainly opportunities for folks to change their business model and rent longer than 30 days to avoid a tax implication. And there's possibly an opportunity for them to underfile. But if they do underfile, they also risk the possibility of an audit. I do have an audit team, and we actually have kicked off a few STR audits recently. So we are trying to check to make sure the public's getting what it should.
Okay, so to make sure I'm understanding fully, there were no downward adjustments versus pre-implementation of this tax figures to account for either what I just described or economic conditions in general?
So actually, economic condition, and I'm not gonna guarantee you're gonna get 2.7 million in this first full year.
That's what I'm
either.
trying to get at, is,
No.
if I'm right, I don't, about my assumptions, which I have high confidence in.
So there's all sorts of reasons why this number is gonna be wrong. I'll tell you it's gonna be wrong. There could be greater ADR, which has happened quite a bit since the estimates were even developed. There could be an economic downturn or change in that environment. That's also a possibility. So no, I have not factored in some percentage of folks that decide to not file anymore. That said, everyone that has gotten a permit have a couple of things. They have a reason not to give it up at this point, because if they do, they lose it into perpetuity and they have to go on a wait list. So there's that issue. And then if they do decide not to rent, basically, or under report, we can certainly, again, audit them. So we know who those folks that carry a permit are now, which is the benefit of the system that the council has supported in the past.
But we don't know who does not carry a permit.
Well, yes and no. So our data actually scrapes the internet, and it scrapes 30-plus sites, certainly all the big ones and some others. So it actually identifies those that are renting and do or don't have a permit, and then we contact them and say, you're either renting legitimately or not. We've had instances where we've found a unit or two that doesn't have authorization to rent because it's an affordable housing unit, and we've made that process end quickly.
I understand that. Okay, thanks. I think it's important to understand that we could be significantly off the mark on this annual.
You bet.
Revenue
It
number.
could be higher as well, and in which case, currently the tax is restricted under Tabor, so.
This is more of a point for the council. Should I save that for later, or
If it's relative to this, go right ahead.
relative to
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
So, in regards to the ratios, proposed 75-25, I think it's worth us looking back to our retreat a couple weeks ago, in how we talked about looking at everything through an environmental lens. I think those are John's words, if I'm not mistaken. And given what seems to be pressing needs for a lot of quote-unquote infrastructure upgrades, you know, a lot of them that are important to me are building upgrades like the Armory. So maybe we're tackling a significant portion of the environmental intent anyways. So I would ask us all to consider the ratio in that context. And then on your second question, Pete, what is the Park and Open Space Fund's ability to support some of these capital maintenance needs? Not whether they're allowed to.
Sure.
But, you know, what can they financially support? Do they have millions in surplus to fund upgrades at the Arc, et cetera?
Here we are. So on this slide, you can see that roughly the dollar magnitude that's being proposed to shift over. It's that last yellow, if that is yellow, highlighted row. So it's $1.5 million in 1 year, and it goes down to 220,000 the second year to the end. So it kind of goes up and down a bit, but on average, I'd say it's a little less than $1 million a year if you kind of annualize that out. The Parks and Open Space Fund can support this, and we've kind of modeled this at this point. It has, basically its major source of revenue is 1.5% sales tax. So between the strong economy we've had locally, we've been collecting a lot of high dollar tax years the last number of years. We don't always bank on that, I will say that. I think for this year, we assumed it would be flat when we set the budget. So we have some softness kind of built in there. And so far this year, while it has started to trend a bit downward, it's still above average. So we're doing well. And so that combined with its existing fund balance, it is actually quite stable in the Parks and Open Space Fund to be able to absorb this. That said, I have had a conversation just today about the high price of construction, and they're experiencing it too. So there is going to be some eyes that we have to keep on that, basically.
Thanks. So just to make sure I'm perfectly clear, when you look at like a 10-year
Yep,
outlook for what Parks wants and needs to do to those three facilities,
we're still in the positive.
we feel good. Okay, thanks. That's it for my questions.
Thanks, Bill. John, any questions, comments at this time?
No questions, just the packet I think was very informative and well-written. I was, I guess, a little disappointed that we're shifting from 70-30 to 75-25, but I understand the logic behind it.
Just to be clear, that was very confusing. We're only talking about the 30% being split 75-25.
Okay,
70% still going to affordable housing of the aggregate pool.
thanks for clearing that up.
Yep.
Again, this makes a lot of sense to me, and it does allow us to speed up the process for the Armory if we can figure out a way to do that. So thanks for a well-written memo.
And then my only question around this is, what restrictions are we putting on ourselves with this delineation? We're talking about it going into general fund as well, and any projects coming forward we'd be talking about and how they support environmental initiatives and the like. So it feels like there's flexibility in projects. Programmatically, we're delineating 70-30 or whatever we're gonna land on, whatever. But it doesn't feel super restrictive in the uses on the environmental bucket.
So in terms of the 25% of the 30%, or whatever that number becomes?
Correct.
Yeah, so basically I did just put a top line number to say that we are going to apply whatever we collect to those environmental initiatives, being those things that climate action brings back to you all in terms of advancing the ASAP or the CAP or whatever you want to say. So.
Okay.
I think the key thing is, and this is the way it's understood, but perhaps not articulated right now, is that this new revenue source is not to take the place of the currently allocated resources. from the general sales tax to this. So we're not taking money from here and then moving that general sales tax money somewhere else. This is to grow in that program area to support the community, is our understanding at the staff level. So an absolute dollar increase in that spending would occur with whatever allocation the council chooses. And how it looks on the books side of it, as you sort of were inquiring about at the beginning, Mayor, is that it will depend on whether the revenues will be receipted, but they'll be managed in a certain way depending upon how they're used. So whether there's debt issuance or anything like that we need to manage, we just have different accounting standards, so we have to maintain for that compared to a cash paid project.
And then, Pete, does this come back to us in resolution?
We talked about it.
So we've debated this. We actually think you do it in the adoption of the budget as an annual activity. We can write it into the financial policies, and you can then, the council was given the flexibility by the voters to evaluate this split based upon community needs. You were given that ability each year. But we need a starting target for the first year for starting the 2024 budget preparations. And if we get in there and you think it's off, no problem. We'll adjust when you see what the dollar, how much does X dollars actually accomplish. You may not be happy with that, and we can revisit it at that time.
Thank you for that. Ward?
Follow-up question on that. Would this be coming to us then in the 2024 budget starting in October?
We will start using it for our financial modeling now. We actually already have, but you will do it, your actual adoption would occur in December when you adopt the 2024 budget, would be the formal vote. The reason why we're not suggesting a resolution now is because you may see what can happen with those dollars and think you want a different split once it's in a more of a programmatic standpoint for you.
All right, they're looking for a little bit of direction here. I'm supportive of what's been brought forward to us. I think Bill is advocating for more going towards the infrastructure and less the environmental side.
Yeah, I have some thoughts to share on that.
And Sam, you were kind of asking questions along the same line.
Yes.
So, Ward, where are you with what's been presented by staff?
I accept the 75-25 split of the 30%. And as we see exactly how that how that pans out in the 2024 budget discussions, I can make adjustments along those lines. But I think that if we're doing something infrastructure-wise, that we do filter it through the lens of the environment. So I think that, yeah, I'm good with 75-25, and when we get down to a little bit more granular, starting in October, when we look at the 2024 budget, we can always change things around. So I support the 25-75.
Thank you. John, you said earlier you were comfortable with staff's recommendation. You still there?
Yes,
Okay.
we asked them what we wanted them to do, and this is what they think is the best way forward, and so I support it.
Okay. That's three members that are supportive, and with a nod to you guys, we're able to revisit this and talk about this as we see a little bit more coming back. Bill, on your point about the dark side, this council also has the opportunity, if we see fit in the future, to raise the quota cap that's been put on STRs as well. So, there's other mechanisms for us to kind of work around that as well, and we're obviously going to be learning more about it as we go, because this has just been implemented May 1st, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I wasn't here to shame it. I didn't say that to shame anyone. I just wanted to make sure we understood what the financial projections, how accurate they were.
Right.
And on, totally respect the will of the majority on the split between infrastructure and environmental objectives. But I think I'd like to say that I think this is a difference between wants and needs. And everything I'm hearing about from members of the community and from staff is that we need to spend a bunch of money on infrastructure coming up, and we don't have that money. I mean, Pete showed us borrowing $29 million in a few years to fund the Armory, which is a highly desired project. The environmental side are things that we want to do, or past council has wanted to do. It's already happening to some extent. This is an enhancement of that. So I personally feel that it's irresponsible to allocate any money to that right now. We should be preparing for the future, for great capital needs in the future, for projects like the Armory that we talked about tonight, and an innumerable list of others that this community needs to happen. So I don't know if that changes anyone's perspective, but I do think that not taking the opportunity to try to fund these projects is a mistake.
And would your suggestion be to move it towards the 80-20 split that was shown there, or 100% and just take it all out of?
If it was up to me, I'd do 100-0.
Okay, all right. Second question was clarification on utilization of these funds for maintenance, upkeep of facilities, et cetera. Capital.
It was recreation, use for capital at the recreation facilities out of the Parks and Open Space Fund.
Council, Bill, start with you.
Yeah, based on
Question
what
two.
Pete said, I'm comfortable.
Thank you. John?
Same.
Ward? And Bill? I mean, Sam?
Yep.
Thanks. All righty.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
I'm gonna say no, just so it's 4-1.
Okay.
0 days since last unanimous vote.
You ready? Like the big boulders over in Leadville. Item number 2 is listed here as asset management plan review, revenue assumptions, but let's move on then. We'll get to our ACRA.
How come we're skipping that, Tori?
Because
It was part of that same
it was
discussion.
kind of,
Okay,
that was it.
got it. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
I thought, let me just get set up.
Sure.
So members of council, Jennifer will be providing an overview for you this evening, just a refresher of what the direction received by resolution back a few years ago. Also, the representative ACRA will be presenting some information as well. And then, of course, we're here for Jim and I on questions related to the agreement that was executed in March of this year that is also in play in all of this.
I was just trying to think of things environmental side. Yeah, I figured that out. Be nice to use it.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry. Yeah.
Custom engineered,
How did that get set up like that?
plus with that, reduced stream flow, there's
I think that's in my calendar.
I just need to make sure we get the text set up.
Everybody asks for this.
just realized, I forgot about that. I'll get back to you. Thanks.
No, that's the most important argument. We get more allocation of funds rather than just like, we could use it for things. That's all. So that's good.
So that's one of
Thanks, Bon.
Thank you. Okay, sorry for that. It's been a while since I've connected. My name's Jennifer Phelan. I'm the development manager, and I'm in the asset department. There's a few new faces at the council that I haven't met before, so thank you for serving and welcome. We'll be talking tonight about the Main Street Cabin, Old Powerhouse, and Armory, and the remodel and reuse plans for these buildings. All right, so the request of council this afternoon is to get direction on the programming and remodel timelines for the Main Street Cabin, the Old Powerhouse, and the Armory. Got some historic photos of the buildings here. They're kind of fun. We've had a number of work sessions with council and regular meetings where we've talked about the plans for these three build city assets. And what's been the result of these meetings is the adoption of resolutions and direction on how to remodel and reuse these buildings. Resolution number 23, series of 2022, which was adopted in, I think, February of 2022, directed staff to remodel the cabin as employee housing, to remodel the old Powerhouse as city offices, and remodel the Armory to house, and this was actually modified at the meeting, but to house as much community use as possible in the building and include Sister Cities meeting room, the primary ACRA visitor center, and primary ACRA office space in the building. So based on that resolution and other direction that staff has received, we've started moving forward on these three projects. With the Main Street Cabin to date, the building currently houses special events and transportation. Staff has been hiring an architect with other sub-consultants. But what we did before we worked with other sub-consultants, we initially worked with an architect to look at some redevelopment scenarios of the building. The Main Street Cabin is a small pan abode. It's historically designated, and it has an addition on the back. The architect was able to look at potentially what could be done with the building. We looked at up to a triplex for the building, and at a work session with council, we received direction that we should develop it with a duplex, maximize the number of bedrooms in it, and go this path because of the budget that's allocated for it and the timeline to redevelop it as a duplex rather than a scrape and replace of an addition and just a larger scope of work. Currently, we are developing building permit documents, and a hearing is scheduled before the Historic Preservation Commission in July for this project. We're anticipating construction in 2024, and prior to that, transportation and special events will need to be relocated. With the old Powerhouse, to date, the building currently houses the asset department and ACRA. It's been evaluated for remodel as city offices and/or city offices in a public meeting space. Council determined to remodel the building solely as city offices. And currently, staff is developing the schematic design for the building. We'll be looking at temporary relocation of the asset department anticipated at second quarter of 2024 to accommodate the remodel, and ACRA was targeted for Armory relocation the fourth quarter of 2023. And the construction target remodel date is third quarter 2024 for this project. Okay, and with the Armory direction to date, staff came to the City Council in early February of 2022. I think that's right. And we summarized a path for outreach to the public to look at remodeling that building as a community space. We completed that outreach in May of 2022, and as part of our coming back to council, we gave you a summary of the top uses identified by the public. We also had shown a number of remodeling options for the building to the public and to City Council. The top kind of 5 things that we heard from the public is that, from the outreach, is that casual dining was the top rated item that people wanted to see. They wanted to see it be a community center, that it had multi-purpose space, potentially house nonprofits, and then the last of the top 5 was lower price retail. In looking over a couple different remodeling options, we looked at kind of a light touch. We also looked at kind of mid-range remodel, and then what we called the works, really an extensive, very extensive remodel of the building. That ranged from $7.5 million basically to $26 million, and the mid-range remodel was the preferred alternative, which was estimated at a high cost level of $18 to $23 million. There was some concern about funding options for that, and so in February of 2023, we came back to council again to reaffirm the direction for the remodel of the project, but also talk about when we thought the city would have funds to be able to start doing a remodel of the project. We were looking at 2028 to start construction. And although council was okay with that date, it did point out that it would like to see the process sped up if possible. So as far as remodeling, this building was anticipated to be the last building to be remodeled of the 3 city assets, and that was because of basically the needs of moving ACRA and city offices around and trying to minimize both the number of times people are moved, so minimize displacement, and also considered, just the logical way of a critical path to redevelop these projects. So in the February work session in 2023, we had an original timeline that showed construction starting in 2028. We've talked internally about how we could compress that timeline. The green rows are a compressed timeline. We think if we get started right away, we'd have about 1.5 years of design and entitlements. We'd then be looking at 1 year for a building permit. And we would look at construction in 2026. And so this is the kind of path that the city has looked at with the 3 individual buildings. What we are looking at direction-wise with council tonight is with regard to the programming of the 3 assets. Do we maintain the expectations of resolution number 23, which has as much community use as possible in the building, maintaining the sister cities meeting room, ACRA, both the visitor center and staff in that building. We're also wondering, should staff continue to follow previous council direction regarding the order of redevelopment of these buildings? So basically Main Street Cabin and Old Powerhouse at a similar pace, with Armory last. We are trying to confirm that ACRA, should it be a temporary use in the Armory, as we were looking at moving them into the Armory fourth quarter, I think, actually, October, November, December of 2023. And then, keep them there during the design and entitlement phases of the Armory project. And then a final question tonight, and is ACRA a user of the Armory after its remodel? So we're looking to get direction tonight on, are we continuing on the path that we've heard before? Are we taking a different direction? That's what we'd like to know. And we also have ACRA here to talk about their needs this evening.
Thanks, Jen. Are there any specific questions at this time? Then we'll get into some discussion, and we'll probably hear from ACRA to answer some questions directly from them.
I have one question.
Bill?
Thanks, Jen. For the Main Street Cabin, I don't know the full history of this. This was the Mountain Rescue Cabin, correct?
Correct.
In the past, have there been any scenarios contemplated where this was sold to be redeveloped as affordable housing to somebody else?
Okay. So City Council had that specific conversation about maintaining the historic asset and wanting to keep the historic resource on its original location, which created some limitations in maximizing the parcel for any other use. And so the next conversation the council was about who lives in this. They wanted to maintain the building within the city's inventory because of the higher than usual maintenance required on the historic structure. When it's affordable housing, then what would happen if we had put it in a typical ownership or rental model within the APSHA program. So it was within the 505 program. So the city is overseeing the long-term capital needs and preservation of the historic resource.
Thank you.
Follow-up questions? Okay. I think if Debbie is here, Debbie, will you come on up to the table?
Do you mind if Jennifer joins me?
I don't mind.
This other Jen. I'm the big picture, she's the nuts and bolts.
Well, we'll take some of each then, thank you.
Thank you.
You're the forest, she's the trees.
Kind of, yeah.
Jen, can you put up those 4 questions? Because yeah. So I want to start with the bottom question. We've all been talking about the Armory remodel, and most people have a concept of it of being kind of an open floor plan so that it can accommodate gatherings, maybe live music, talks. But also, the idea that the bottom floor, what have you, would be a food court or some sort of food service, obviously ranked high on the community's list of wants. Would ACRA fit in there? Would ACRA, is that a location, if that is turned into a community building, is that a location that works compatibly with ACRA? And I know that you don't know the floor plan right now, but just take for a minute what I said is all of the suggestions that we have seen are, we're gonna lose a floor. Either the 3rd floor is coming out or the 1st and 2nd floor are coming out kind of thing. So that leaves us some limited space. And that's I'm like, are you anticipating that if you were to move back to the Armory after its remodel, it would be visitor center as well as your offices?
That's the question?
Yeah, that is a question. Is that your anticipation that it would be a visitor center and your offices?
Right. Well, we do have a vision, which is to create an environment for Aspen to thrive. And we are very amenable. I think I've talked to you, Tori, frequently about where the office space ends up. So I sort of have a bigger picture. Jen can get into the nuts and bolts as far as space needs, but after the Armory is remodeled, I think we would be a perfect tenant to be in the building. And I have a few reasons why.
And that includes office space?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like to call them activation centers, not office spaces, because each of the departments that I have under me really intersect with visitor services. So as your service provider, we provide services through a contract with you for visitor services, destination management, special events. It seems to make sense to keep the organization somewhat together. Now, when we go down the road for the remodel, if we all say, it's open space, there's no places to house you, this doesn't make sense, here's an alternate location. As I said, we're very amenable.
Okay.
And I just do want to point out that the chair of the board, Crystal Logan, is in the gallery, along with Jeff Bay, who is our vice chair. He becomes the chair in January of 2024. Charlie Bantis is here. He's the organization's treasurer, keeps a good eye on the money, along with Maria Morrow, who's our attorney.
With that, I just want to start with that question because, we're trying to embark on moving stuff around and timeline and stuff, but I just didn't know if this is really, if this works or not. My intention is, our partnership with ACRA, I think, continues. So I appreciate Debbie also saying like, hey, we're looking to work it out. We understand there might be some roadblocks, but right now the concept is that if it worked out there, that would be the location of all facilities. So thank you for answering that. I just needed to know if that was something that we were trying to achieve here. All right. Sam, any questions at this time?
I probably should have asked this before, but what offices are moving into the old Powerhouse? What part of the city departments? Or- Yeah.
Currently, you're looking at special events, asset, and I believe transportation. IT is needed elsewhere.
Sure, so when council reviewed the programming of it, again, the building requires a major renovation to accommodate those departments, including the addition of a second dormer on the second floor, or at least second floor when you look at it, when you're looking north. So that space is programmed out completely to accommodate that. We are likely going to try to squeeze perhaps a few more desks in there for IT as landing zones, but right now we've taken that department and decentralized it through multiple buildings, which is good and bad.
Understood on that. And then we were talking about this earlier. What's the extra FAR that we could expand upon around here for more office space?
So the building next door that was initially built as a youth center does have some additional FAR on its parcel that is possible. Back when decisions were being made about the construction of this building back in 2018, there was a decision, well, even before that, back to 2012, to not pursue that FAR in conjunction with this project, but that it would be available for future councils should it need to expand its footprint at that time to provide government services.
Is that a space that ACRA could go into?
If the council is interested in spending those kinds of resources, we would need to take a serious look at your asset management plan. To construct that additional FAR is, I couldn't even give you an estimate right now, but it's a lot.
No, that's fair. And just like what I'm getting at is just levels of priorities, because I think Tori talked about it, but the food hall is like the number one thing. Casual dining means a lot to me in this community as far as what happens in the Armory. And I do love ACRA, and I think ACRA does amazing work in this community. I just would more ask where on the priority list are they and what comes before it? Because casual dining to me obviously comes before it. Can they fit in with all the other things that we want in the Armory space? And if not there, then they've said they're amenable. Where else can they go? And that's why I ask these questions. So.
Can I jump in at all? Will we have a chance, like, we keep talking about ACRA office space and ACRA, but what I'm envisioning for the Armory is a 21st century City of Aspen welcome center, where we have visitor services. We're seeing just under 100,000 visitors a year. We don't have a Forest Service in Aspen, and visitors need information. So to have a visitor center that has Forest Service, that is welcoming, that has a sense of place, that has a sense of history to it, that's the vision of how we're seeing the Armory play out, a place where people can dwell. And Sam, the food court sounds fabulous. Wouldn't you want the power of 93,000 people coming through the door, coming through the food court too? So the visitor center isn't ACRA's. It's actually the City of Aspen's. We're just your service provider. So we want to start talking about this big welcome center that we're bringing people into our community, because right now we're taking them on the busiest intersection, down and then a tough turn, and really not servicing a world-class destination. So that's our vision. Now, if we're talking, Jennifer's got numbers for office space, we're talking pretty minimal office space, but again, we have a membership of 800. They come into the conference rooms and have leads group. They pick up ski passes. They pick up lots of Christmas tree permits. Locals do. So we also are seeing it a place where businesses, visitors, and locals would come and dwell together. So while we're amenable to going where you'd like us to go, the office part of it, I just hope that this isn't really about ACRA. This is about the City of Aspen's 21st century welcome center. And you've got the perfect location for it. You have that sense of history. You have a sense of place that you've arrived in Aspen. So I know we keep saying ACRA, but really the visitor center is yours. We're your service provider. And we really do believe that we're woefully inadequate today. So I don't have a presentation, and I don't want to talk too much, because when I start talking, I start yelling because I get so excited about it. But the future could be really, really bright. And all of it intersects together. So if we're a block or two away, okay. But I do know the county, the city, many of you have brought operations under one roof. So it'd be unfortunate for me if, when the visitor center person needs to take a break, the destination management person can't come out and cover the desk or talk about destination management efforts. So it does work together, but we are your community partner, so we're going to do what we think, what you believe is right for the community as well.
I appreciate that. You know, I share some of the vision that you just spoke to, and we've talked about it a little bit, but I share some of the vision. But I will remind you that the voters of Aspen did not vote an advisory question on a world-class visitor center. That's not what the question was. It was a community center, and so while ACRA could and should have a role there, and similar to the vision that you just said, the community's expectations are a little different than just that.
Yeah, well, we're just talking about a small little segment of the building.
All right, let's get on to some of these other questions.
Can we share thoughts on each of these questions? Or,
Yeah.
Just some questions for staff. How do you want to do it?
Yeah, I want to start seeing if there's any viable alternatives to what you're seeing in front of you, and ask away. And you can start, Bill.
Thanks. We're going with the last question first, correct?
You can do whatever you
Okay.
want.
Well, I would suggest that we do these one at a time, because I think there's a lot of complexity to each of them, but up to you.
Sure, start with number one if you like.
Well, I'll start with number 4, since I think we're
go.
in that conversation already.
All right.
Debbie, I like you and I like ACRA a lot. I echo a lot of what Tori said. I think it's critical for the Armory to be a community use, as the community expressed. I think that a visitor center And in my mind, that means a kiosk plus, perhaps, you know, an enhanced version of what exists at the corner of Cooper and Galena is what belongs there. And it can also help issue Forest Service permits and things like that. And, you know, I'm not saying it's the exact same dimensions as what's there, but something minimal that can help guide visitors. There is not a single local that I've ever talked to that's asking me for a larger City of Aspen or ACRA visitor center. I've not heard that at all. I understand the importance of it in the community. I do not think ACRA's offices belong in this building. I don't think that there will be adequate space for them there. I also don't understand and don't believe that the City of Aspen should be providing office space for ACRA. We have, there's plenty of office space on the free market in Aspen, and the city itself is already short of office space, from what I understand, despite this new building. So yes, I think ACRA and, you know, as Debbie accurately pointed out, the City of Aspen Visitor Center does play a role in the Armory after its remodel, but I do not think that it should have a major, dominating, large, significant footprint. I think it should be minor, and I think that inviting our visitors into what will be an incredible space with its own set of amenities, and I'm sure plenty of historical information on the walls and things like that about what Aspen is and was, is adequate. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. John, do you have any comments, questions, or the like on just question number 4?
Just question number 4. I agree also with what's been said. I appreciate Debbie and ACRA as an organization. I do want to honor the voters' wishes, and I think that is for a community space. Does that include a visitor center? I think so. Does it include all the offices? I'm not sure about that. But it seems like we have the time during the period where it's being remodeled to get down to the bottom of that. For right now, the ACRA in the Armory is, I think that's where it should be.
All right. Do you want to weigh in on?
Yeah, first of all, I think that it's a good use for a temporary at the Armory for the Powerhouse remodel. And as far as ACRA as a user of the Armory after the remodel, yes, but to what extent? I think the total ask is 1,000 feet for a visitor center, 2,500 for offices. So that's 3,500 square feet. And also it says ACRA membership services there, so we would be subsidizing the membership services, the lodging taxes for destination marketing. So I have concerns about that. I know that the advisory vote in 2015 was to use, it was a close vote, an advisory vote, to use it for community use. And the number of work sessions that we've had about discussing about what to do with the Armory, I think have always been focused on keeping as much of it as possible for community use. So I think that Forest Service kiosk and a visitor center are certainly valid and necessary uses of the Armory. The offices, I don't know how you can divide how your offices are used for membership services versus destination marketing. But I do have concerns about using a lot of the Armory for offices, and would actually prefer that we have most of that building for community use. So that's a concern in the short term. Yes, Armory should move in there for the old Powerhouse remodel. And I have other things to mention, but if we're just going to keep it to the Armory and ACRA at this point.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Sam? Just question 4. And it doesn't have to be concrete right now. What we've just heard is there's flexibility on both sides, so.
It's just that the only vision I've heard of the Armory so far has come from a gentleman named Richard Lai, who I'm sure many of you know of. And when he sent me his like drawing, it was a very open space drawing of the Armory where it was sort of just like blown out as far as like the sort of concrete mixer that is what it looks like now. And it's just hard to imagine this like office space in there along with this like giant vast hall that I hope to envision, because it's not like we want like a food hall in the basement that just looks dingy. It's going to be like high ceilings and, like you said, taking out like a floor because of that. So it's just it's nothing against ACRA. It's just a priority of making that space what people have imagined it to be. And it's really cool looking at what it used to be when there was like dances at the Armory in the 1950s. I mean, it was very tall ceilings and very elegant, and it'd be really cool to see it something like that again with that community use again. So.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is there's a lot of support for the visitor center, the USFS and stuff like that, and then questions around what the office space will be. That will come through in design and iterations that we go through. Who knows? We could all be surprised and say, wow, that's amazing that it all fits there. And ACRA might be like, you know what? That works great, and it's small, and we love it. So who knows? So I am hearing support that, yeah, there is some space. And we look at ACRA as a partner in the Armory going forward. To what degree, we don't know. I have a question here, and we've talked about this, and we've explored it, but do we not have the opportunity to leave ACRA where they are right now and you figure out temporary usage at the Armory for the next year and a half while planning is going on in trying to get our plans, entitlements, and construction going on the Armory? And I know we've talked about it before, but can we just speak to that one more time?
So.
Timeline, yes.
Right, so I think what's key here is that if you were to leave ACRA at the Armory, at the old Powerhouse, you don't have enough time for this timeline. You could extend it another visitor season, for sure, maybe even two. But with construction starting in 2024, it will not be in a building that we can meet our landlord requirements in with a tenant in there. There'll be, the power will be cut at times, water service will be removed at times. It's a major overhaul that building needs, with tuck pointing on the exterior, a new roof, addition of an elevator. Those are all things that would be in conflict come October of 2024. So the longest you could leave ACRA, any tenant in that space, is October 24. And then all of those will need to move into the Armory during the remodel of the Powerhouse. And that is, you're further along, based upon the direction we were given in 2022, on getting to construction on the Powerhouse than you are on the Armory.
Because I know that our priority here is to move Armory forward. The Main Street cabin doesn't have huge impact on that. The power plant does. So if there was a way to leave ACRA where they are for now,
Or there's other options.
and there's a couple other options, and get the remodel of the Armory started, but you're already talking about, anyway. We've talked about it before. I'm just trying to see if we can flip the priority there and get Armory underway.
We could talk about an alternate temporary location for a visitor center, and ACRA could figure out its office space itself. That's another option.
Ward, you had a comment?
Well, yeah, all of these things are jigsaw puzzle pieces put together. And, we've, I had to chuckle when Jen mentioned the preferred alternative for the building. That term has double meaning for the entrance and Castle Creek Bridge, but You know, we were talking about the middle road, and one of the options that we were talking about is adding more space along the alley where the parking is now. And, you know, we've had a number of different scenarios presented, from putting lipstick on a pig to totally redoing the building with $30+ million in the end. And if we decide and if we fund additional space along the alley, which I wasn't really supportive of, but that would give space perhaps for ACRA to have offices in that building, yet freeing up the major part of the building for community service or community use. So it's like, can we make all these decisions before we really know what the layout and the use of the Armory is going to be?
I would add, in my opinion, I think we need to conceptually decide, without any drawings, what the Armory is going to be used for. I'm not sure we're the right people to lead the design effort for the Armory. But I think we need to really agree on and decide what is going to go into that building long-term. And if, you know, if the food hall is the desired solution, I would suggest that we find an operator to partner with from day one and let them have the entire space, because it's not a huge building, and I don't believe that it can accommodate a variety of different uses. Again, I think it's important to have a small visitor center in there, but beyond that, trying to fit too many puzzle pieces into a small puzzle, I don't think is going to work well. And I'm not sure that we're going to be the most efficient and best party to lead that design effort. So I think we should really figure out what's going to go in there and not leave a lot of loose strings.
I appreciate that. A couple of comments. Number one, I don't agree to say that it should only be a food hall and we should forgo all the other community desires that have been shared with us.
I agree on that.
But I understand what you're saying. And then the second thing that I would say is, you know, you're right. We're not the most efficient. But our charge is different than just efficiency, right? So where we try to get efficient doesn't always get us there. So I appreciate what you're saying. I just wanted to acknowledge, yeah, we're not. You don't have to guess on that one. All right. Again, like I said, I see amended timeline may enable a start in 2026 for construction start. Jen, the word may is in there. What does may hinge on?
Well, I mean, these are estimates on a number of factors. I think going to sort of what Bill was saying, I think it's going to be really important to do some feasibility analysis with people who know what they're doing and have background in multiple tenants, food hall, design, to really see what can fit in that building. That's going to take time. It's an RFP, it's getting someone on board, it's getting that design going to see what can actually work in that building. And I'd say it's really important to make sure that it can work. Not just the design, but like, how are we thinking it's going to work? The last thing we need is to go forward on something that I think is really important to the community and not do the best we can on it and make sure we can do everything possible to make it successful. So there's going to be a design component. We're probably going to need to do more public outreach just to make sure everyone's on board still of where we're going direction-wise. It might be that, you know, the top 5 things people wanted in this building won't fit. And then it's going to be decision time of what makes the most sense. So that's going to take a little bit of time. The entitlement process will take some time. You're talking about change of use in the building. You'll be needing land use entitlements. And then, you know, with the building permit, I estimated a year. I'm
We're
hoping
going to
that
fix that, right? We're going to have it done in 3 months.
that would be amazing. But, you know, it does take time. So I'm trying to give you a realistic timeline. We think we could get started in 2026. I just, things can change over time also.
Okay, I appreciate that. You know, I mean, I'm not being presented with really many other options besides the path that we're on to make this work in the long run. And that's tough, I continually wonder about ACRA's location. I keep looking over at this building out my windows. It's above our parking garage and out onto Galena Plaza. And, going back 5 years when this came to council table, I did not support even what we're talking about right now. So I'm trying to do my best to make this work out the best for the community, but I'm not hearing a whole bunch of alternatives. So unless council members,
Alternative to what? Sorry.
like I said, I want to move forward with the Armory. That's priority here for me.
Likewise.
And we're playing a shell game of where we can put people while we're doing the work, and we've got a year and a half till the construction actually starts, so we can use this building for a little bit. In that meantime, and we've drawn that line out longer because we want to renovate another space, which is going to take a little extra time before we can get everybody back out of there in order to do that space. And that's just a lot of movement for me, and I'm just continually trying to think of how we can leave things a little bit more in place and get that project going on. Other goals there, I mean, in the next year and a half, if that building were available, I know that there's some community uses that could be in there. So I'm just, at this time, and I've pushed on this for 4 years of asking for other alternatives. How can we move this around differently? How can we got funding availability a little bit through the STR tax that helped us move this timeline up a little bit. So that was good news, but we're still at this point where we've got to move them out of there, over to there to fix that, to move them out of there to fix that. And it's just more than, it's just more than I really want this process to have to take place. Bill, you were just talking about other office space that was available in town.
Yeah.
I wish I had a little information about that. I mean, I don't know if
Let me give you some.
commercial office rates are low. I don't know if you have maybe 2,500 square feet in the building that you own downtown.
But somebody in this room does.
So I'm just wondering about some other, opportunities there.
Thanks, that was going to be one of the things I wanted to talk about. So Ruth has a building that I continually think about on Main Street that used to be Title Company of the Rockies that I think could be a very suitable office for ACRA. Do we need a temporary visitor center, or can we rely on the kiosks? I don't know. I mean, Debbie and her team can answer that, but I certainly think that would be a totally reasonable fit for the next few years for ACRA, and that would resolve the old Powerhouse issue. And we can let them speak to that, but that's not the only space that's available. I think still, and Ruth might be able to answer this more specifically, but I think where the City of Aspen Building Department was housed temporarily across the street, the lower level is still available. Not positive, but I think so. That's also a suitable office space. Again, ACRA has both sort of a private Chamber of Commerce function and a function of services contracted by the city. I don't know why it's our responsibility to provide all of their office space. I don't know why that makes sense, and I'm not sure it's the right use of the funds from the tax. Yeah, that's it on that point. I want to sort of add one question for all of council. Maybe I might as well do it now. When we're talking about what uses go in this building, I know all of you hear from different members of the community about what they envision to go in there, but I ask each of you, other than city staff or ACRA, has anyone ever suggested office space in there?
Yeah,
They haven't to me,
in the Armory?
in the Armory.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a lot of requests for it,
Specifically to support social services in the community.
and other nonprofits, whether it was the Physics Institute or even more. I mean,
So
yeah,
maybe I should have phrased it specifically as ACRA office space.
that, I don't
Has
think,
anyone asked for that other than ACRA and city staff?
well, I don't think that's been a conversation for anybody else, so.
Something to contemplate. Anyhow, so I think we don't need to be limited by the options presented.
And the city doesn't give the chamber their space.
No, we pay, the chamber pays for its space, and the destination management pays for its portion of its space, but the nonprofit pays the rate.
I think part of that is the rate that the ACRA pays versus what free market rate is too.
It's a tough conversation. Can we maybe start moving towards what Jen talked about in design and just like moving the steps forward on that front? Because I think what we do, I feel like we agree on is that it should be community space and food hall, and moving towards that RFP seems like something that I feel like there's agreeance on.
Yes, answering these questions. If you,
Yeah.
if that's what you want, then you are saying, yes, we should continue to follow the direction that we're on right now.
Well, like you said, I haven't heard from anyone how it can be moved up in a better way. And I'm very happy that 2026 instead of 2028. And obviously, it's going to take a lot of time to design and move through the process. So I feel,
Yeah.
I wish it could be done in a snap of fingers, but I also would love to see us start working towards design and conceptualize what can go into that building. And I think it will answer all the other questions.
Thanks. Go ahead, Ward.
Yeah, I think that what Sam and Bill are saying is that they're suggesting a design and an understanding what the building's used for before we go forward. And I hear Bill saying he wants, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but understand, as I understand it, that you want an RFP from the very beginning. Here's a building, what can we get from an RFP side? And from the city side, what we've done before and what we were looking at is, and what the process I think we did with the lumberyard is that we take community values, we take what the outreach has said, what the community wants, both with the lumberyard and the Armory building, and we design around that, and whether we can give those parameters for an RFP, and if that's a better process, I'm open for that discussion. But I think all of that is, it requires, as Sam's saying, that we have to decide what we want the building to be. And that's, in the short term, I think that we're going in the right direction. In a little bit longer term, without extending past the 2026, and doing an RFP, what that's all gonna look like, I think is worth the discussion.
Thanks. John, any final thoughts?
Just want to say this is a game of musical chairs, and what staff has lined up for how the timeline makes perfect sense to me. I understand it. We don't want to be paying rent for our departments in the mill building or anywhere else. So I support what staff has lined out for us, and I'm pleased that the Armory is going to be moved up to 2026. I think that's a huge step forward.
All right.
So I guess I have a question. If we go the RFP route, are we forfeiting the 2026 start date or completion date?
So my suggestion on saying we need to set up basically analysis, feasibility study of the building and what can actually fit into it would be led by the city. I think what Bill is suggesting is something slightly different than what I was suggesting, which is getting someone on board at the very beginning, which brings up issues of operation,
Yeah,
et cetera.
let us propose back to the council how we want to approach the work. We're hearing what the timeline is. You're asking us to prioritize in the budget. But again, where the line is how we get there is the administration's responsibility to put most of that together with council's oversight. So I think we need a little time to circle around that, but it's a little hard for us to go hire folks who do different things if we don't know if that use is going to be a prominent use of that building or not yet. And so if you recall in the past, when we've done feasibility studies, we typically use our as-needed contracts with current architects of record or planners of record, depending of the type of the project. And I think that's where we can start, is looking at that, because we need I could tell right now, I feel like I'm going in without direction on use. I know I've got a visitor center that includes the Forest Service. That's all I've heard consensus on at the table for a 19,000 square foot building. So I need some better visioning and consensus, and we can bring in some design professionals that can help the council in a work session environment, work on that to help articulate to each other and what you're hearing from the community is where I think we need to go before we do any large RFPs. We need to just start small and get a little better agreement at the council table, so it's a single voice direction coming back to staff from what I'm reading of this meeting. Because right now, I don't think question 4 has been answered amongst you as a council, which means question 1's not answered. And then remember, ACRA has the choice of not moving into the Armory, but they will have to move out of the Powerhouse. And that's really up to the ACRA staff and their board to make a choice about whether they want to move twice or not, and what those implications of those finances are for their nonprofit, and that's okay. We're providing what we can provide within the program direction we have, and we'll support ACRA how we can, even if they choose not to go that route of using the city facilities. That's okay. We're still strong partners in a lot of our work we do day in and day out.
Sarah, as we go forward, there are a couple things I want to make sure that it's understood that the city of Aspen is a city building, it's a city asset, and the city maintains control of that building. And as we come back, if we come back, an analysis of what free market rent versus rent at the Armory is as it relates to ACRA. And I know that we've had a long history of helping supply office space for ACRA. A brief review of that would be useful for setting the context going forward.
It's really simple. I'd let Debbie answer it, but for about 40 years, we've provided office space to ACRA, so this is a really big change in the relationship.
Is there any way the 5 of us can come to a majority position on what goes into this building?
Yeah, I'm already there. I think question 4, we did answer it, and I think we said there's a support for the visitor center, welcome center, et cetera, and how much of ACRA can fit into it is supported by a majority of council members. For me, it's a simple list. Food hall, service of some kind, the visitor center, community uses as in gathering or gathering space, and then if there's other space, the last 2 on the list were community, nonprofit uses, and retail was last. I'm still in that same camp. And as I've said before, are we trying to put too much into our 5-pound bag? It's possible, but we won't know until we see more.
But at least we have priorities. So that list
Yeah.
was an order of priorities. So
Yeah.
food hall was higher than retail or
Correct.
community. So
Right.
see that in the design.
By the way, retail can work in a food hall.
Yeah.
One of the 6 or 8 kiosks can be retail or 2.
Sure, so maybe it does work. Anyway, so that's where I am with it. I think I saw some nodding heads here, agreement on priorities.
I will not support 100% use as food services.
And we're hoping that that's not what our RFP returns us, but we'll see. So I'm going to work us towards the end of this meeting by saying that, yes, we are excited about moving the timeline forward. We are supporting what we've been presented. And is there any requests for any immediate information? No, we're looking for RFP to come back. Sarah, you were gonna kind of give us options for RFP.
Right, but before we get to RFP, I really do believe we need to engage the design community in the feasibility analysis. So this question of what actually fits got a little more maturation for the community
Okay.
and the council. Because right now, the wish list is much longer than the building contains. We all understand that. We also know that working with the community, though, we need to visualize that and workshop that with them. And that is, I would highly encourage us to make sure we keep community engagement frequent and often if this project is kicking off. And that is much more input and goes slow in the beginning to go fast at the end.
Sounds good. What are you, I mean, you kind of said there, engage the design community.
Sure, so in this particular building, you used Charles Cuniff Architects to do this. Charles Cuniff Architects did a lot of planning on that building when it was supposed to be office space. I'm not suggesting that's the appropriate vendor. I think we need to be more broad in our considerations of appropriate vendors. But they do the puzzle. They do the three-dimensional puzzle of what you're asking for. If you want 4 food stalls, and they each need their own hood, what extent of kitchen support and so on, what's the actual floor plate they need compared to these other uses?
Yeah, my question to you is how do you want to get there? Is
Yeah.
that an RFP for that?
We will take a look at the scope of services and decide whether it requires an RFP or if it fits within our as-needed contracts that are approved.
All right, great.
Is there any interest in discussing whether the city should sell the Main Street cabin with some limitations and restrictions?
I think there is actually.
Yeah, now that we're beyond question 4, which we finally, I think, got answered, and maybe question 3, I've brought this up before. Also in the Hyman and Second property, that both of those properties are Aspen Modern. They've been designated, and in doing so have limited the use and of value to the community of the building. Now, you have to weigh that. If we continue to have a pan abode on the Aspen Modern designation, and if, as city council, it is within our power to delist that building as Aspen Modern, and if we delist it, it opens up a lot more potential for the site. Just to throw out, which I've shared in the past, and you mentioned today, Bill, is that, it's possible that we could delist and sell the property and get somebody else to come in and do workforce housing there. I'm just throwing this out as a possible alternative to the idea of just having a duplex there and retaining the Aspen Modern designation, is that you could fund a good portion of the Burlingame 505 units that the city is committed to through the sale of that property. Or if you were to redevelop the lot, it can't be redeveloped, it can't be scraped and replaced with the asset on site. There are a number of examples where historic assets have been moved off the site. The Zepansis building was moved to the Merle Holden property. There's one that's up in my neighborhood that's been moved twice, an asset that's been moved twice, and that the one that's been moved twice is an actual historic designation going back to Victorian days. But it seems that the protection of the asset does not necessarily require where it is located. So I know it opens up a big discussion and a philosophical discussion about the value of having an Aspen Modern designation of a pan abode, when there are some other examples of pan abode construction that are on Aspen Modern protection. So I'm just saying that I think by retaining the Aspen Modern designation, you're limiting the community use of that location. And so I don't, in the past, there has not been council support for removing historic, Aspen Modern designation to a property that the city council actually granted to it. From my standpoint, by granting Aspen Modern to a property, you're removing value to the community of that property. What you're doing in essence is supporting the Aspen Modern program through purchasing from city funds. And I questioned if that's the right use of city funds. And so that discussion I've had for a while, not only on this location, but a piece of property that we finally sold, that was on Hyman and Second, I think. But that is, you opened the door, I just walked in.
No, I think that's all great qualifying information, and I agree with everything you've said. To me, it's a yield question. It's like, why are we spending our time and our financial resources on something that's gonna yield 2 units? You know, if someone else can, either through the relocation or the delisting of the property, or of the historic, Aspen Modern historic asset, you know, if we can open that up for someone else to develop more affordable units, you know, why are we limiting ourselves, and why are we spending our time and our dollars on it?
Just to point out, it is a single lot of record, so it's 30 by 100. And it's going to have some constraints on providing parking on site, whatever that requirement may be, unless that changes.
That would be a good place to waive parking requirements on Main Street, I think, but thanks for that, Jen.
So Bill and Ward are interested in exploring this further. I would need more information. Sam, are you interested in more information around this?
Definitely more information, yeah. It's all new concepts.
All right. Well, if that's the case, then I think we need some background, and it can be sent to council members information only. We don't need to schedule a work session at this time, but I think that there's some information around delisting. There's information around our Aspen Modern program and what this would mean to this property.
I think that HPC should weigh in on this as to how many other panabodes they are and what their, you know, what the lot is, and, you know, fully exploring the options.
John?
Yeah, just a couple comments. I don't think Bill and Sam were here when the proposal for a third unit was presented, but it became obvious that it was just too tight a lot to make it happen economically enough. 2 things. The building that's built, how does it go? The greenest building is the building that's already built. So that's part of the logic in my book in keeping it a panabode. The other thing that pops up in my mind is something Diane Foster said months ago, and that is, as long as we can maintain control of it as employee housing and we own that property, then I'd be okay researching other delisting it and so on. But we never want to let any property go that we own, because you never get it back.
So if we could get some of that information back, that might actually inform all of us, but also Bill and Ward, who are most interested in this possibility.
It seems like it's clear, though, that the Main Street cabin is the lowest priority of the 3 buildings, right? I think
I'm not sure about that.
John brought up a point that has been hammered to me a number of times by somebody in the, that once you own property, you never, the city owns property, you never get rid of it. So that's advice that I have to weigh heavily on, but I want to know what my options are.
Fair enough.
yeah, we have tools in Aspen to control the usage of that property, even if we don't own it. So I wasn't suggesting that it becomes something other than housing. I think the appetite is for that to be housing, but, and deed restricted workforce housing. And I should have qualified my previous statement saying priority regarding the order of redevelopment, not priority in terms of
Yeah.
significance to the community or anything like that. Specifically on question 2, the order of redevelopment.
Correct,
I'm
yeah.
trying to give Jen some feedback here
Yeah.
on some of these questions, so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right. Sarah, do you feel like you need something more from us this evening?
I don't think so. What I'm hearing, just to recap, is the general direction. We'll go back and see whether whether Resolution 23 needs to be amended based on it, but we're hearing, generally speaking, go forward where we are on the old Powerhouse, stay on that train to get that building going. We need to bring back information only about the Main Street Cabin, and most likely what that's going to look like is honestly is the issuance of your previous staff reports for a work session and minutes. I can't remember if there's been minutes. Maybe it's only been summaries of work sessions. So we'll submit that. There's not really a whole lot new to create. We can also go over again what we found out from our investigation of the historic structure and its foundation. That also plays into the remodel costs for anything in that building, whether it's moved or whether it stays. And then we will, right now, go ahead and we will start the process of our work plan for narrowing uses in the Armory. And we will secure the resources we need, and whether we need to come to council or not, we still need to sort out. But to begin reviewing what it takes for the uses we're hearing, and most likely, I think the big conversation points coming back are going to be things about, are you going to remove a floor from the building? Right now, we're operating under the assumption we are not going to dig out the rest of the basement. Those are assumptions that will need to be checked. Both for your budgeting purposes, but also for your programmatic purposes. And we'll see how far, it depends how long it takes the community and the council to make a decision on programming to commit to that 2026 construction timeline. So I want to be clear that this is a short time period to make some of these decisions. So here getting that wrapped up, probably in early fourth quarter this year would be my guess. So we really know what we're doing with uses is an important milestone that we'll bring back to you. Jen, is there anything else?
No, I think we've gotten good feedback with our initial outreach, and we can look at what fits in that building.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Jen, thank you for the presentation. You kept it remarkably simple for what we were trying to deal with, and that's appreciated.
Okay.
All right. I think that's the last item we have on our agenda this evening. We, of course, want to thank GrassRoots TV and all of you guys for being here. We're back tomorrow at 5 o'clock. If you have comments or petitions for citizen comment, please join us at 5 tomorrow here at City Hall. Say chat.